Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I'm made of rubber and you're made of glue. Whatever you say to me bounces off of me and sticks to you. I've heard these phrases all throughout my life. They're well intended, but I don't think they help very much. The truth is, words do hurt. Words have the power to wound. And when people say hurtful or harmful things to us, well, the reality is they do stick. We're not made of rubber. We're made of flesh and bone. We're made of human hearts that can feel the full weight of another's words. Just last week, I was driving our 4-year-old son, Noah, to a speech therapy consult. Becca and I have noticed that Noah slurs a lot of his words together. We have to ask him to repeat himself. What did you say, son? Can you say that again? And as I was driving Noah to a speech therapy consult, I had a flashback to my own self when I was Noah's age, as a young boy who struggled with my speech. One of the ways that I was first wounded in this life was being made fun of for how I couldn't say my S's or CH's without slurring it all together. Being teased in the halls of Rose Hill Elementary School as other kids made their way out to the playground and I took a hard left to go to the speech therapy office for another half hour of practicing my consonants, a word that I still struggle to say. I can chuckle about it now, but the reality is there's still a wound somewhere inside of me related to my speech. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words, they can definitely hurt. You know what it's like to be hurt by something another person says. Maybe you've been told in your life that you're not good enough, you're not strong enough, you're not smart enough, you're not pretty enough. It hurts. When was the first time in your life that you remember being wounded? Did you want to hide it? Did you want to pretend as if it wasn't really there or it didn't really impact you as much as it did? That's how I reacted. I remember sitting in the back of classrooms or on the back of a school bus and choosing not to speak as much as I wanted to because I was afraid that my lisp would come out and I'd be made fun of all over again. This is how I lived a lot of the years in my early childhood. Even in gym class, I can remember when we'd have to count off and do exercises together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10. I would skip saying the 6s and the 7s because I was so aware that I couldn't say them how I wanted to say them. And here's the reality. When I was in the Army and we had to do calisthenics together and work out together, I skipped my 6s and 7s even then as a soldier, afraid to use my voice for some fear that this early childhood wound would come out and somebody would make fun of me once again. We know what it's like to live with these wounds. We don't often treat them. We don't often tend to them. In fact, we tend to hide them. Jesus has a lot to teach us about how to treat wounds, how to deal with pain and suffering. The reality is, Jesus was a wounded person, a wounded healer. As much as Jesus would engage in the work of healing and caring and teaching and uplifting others, Jesus himself was wounded. He had friends who betrayed him, who denied knowing him. He had insults hurled at him. He had others plotting to kill him. And of course, he knew physical pain and suffering. the pain of being stripped naked, mocked, beaten, spat upon. His hands and his feet were driven onto a wooden cross with nails. His side was pierced with a spear. Jesus knew what it was to be wounded physically, but also emotionally. Watching his mother, watching him die. Christ knows the suffering that we know. Christ knows the pain that we know. Just as we have been made fun of and ridiculed and mocked and have known physical pain, Christ has known the same. But in the resurrection of Jesus, Christ also teaches us how to treat a wound, how to not be wholly defined by a wound, even though they do identify us. We all know what it's like to feel an identification with a wound. I feel this every time I come across a fellow veteran, somebody who served in the military in a combat environment. When I meet somebody like that, there's this affinity and connection based off of our shared suffering or lived experience. Maybe you've gone through a divorce, and when you meet somebody else and you learn that they too have suffered through a painful divorce, there is a kindred nature, a connection that forms. Or if I come across somebody that I know also struggled in speech therapy, all of a sudden we are bonded. You see, wounds, they don't only hurt us, they have the power to connect us. And through the grace of God, we can begin to see through the resurrection of Jesus that our wounds do not need to wholly define us. You see, here in Luke's gospel, in Luke chapter 24, the disciples of Jesus are very much wounded. They're down and out, and they're feeling ashamed, for they fled, they ran away, they denied knowing Jesus in his most critical hour as he was crucified. But all their hopes and dreams seemed to be dashed away too. When Christ was crucified, so were their plans. So was their hope. And so they're locked together in a room that is marked by fear. And as Jesus comes, the resurrected Jesus, he speaks these words, "Peace be with you." And then he does something that I find fascinating. He shows them his hands and his feet. He says, look right here. It is I. Jesus, in the resurrection, is still identified by his wounds, the marks of where the nails pierced him. But in showing them these marks, what is Jesus really doing? He's not just saying, hey, look, it's me, I'm the one they crucified. He's showing them that the very worst thing that he suffered on this earth would not have the final answer, would not define him. Look at where they pierced me, and yet I am standing before you. Look at my feet. Remember how they were pierced into a tree and how they hung me on it. Well, look, I am now standing. Yes, the holes are still there, but I am a resurrected being. You see, God's power of life can transform the worst suffering. And although I still might have the marks that identify that suffering, it doesn't define me. In fact, let me show you how much new life is possible. Do you have anything to eat? I'm hungry. He asks for fish. And so he eats. And from there, he sends the disciples we know to go and be a witness to these things. I love that line. Go and be a witness. Go and tell other people about what you have experienced here. That God's power of life and hope and love made manifest in the resurrection is more powerful and defining by the single greatest wound you can ever experience. Christ's way of saying the worst thing that could ever happen to you will not be the last thing, does not need to define you. But there's another element here, another aspect that we could consider. The resurrected Jesus could have just put his hands in his pocket and covered his feet and sort of hidden these marks of the suffering. He could have focused on, hey, I'm alive. Yep, that suffering wasn't really there. It wasn't really a part of my journey. Let's just focus on the good news of today. But he doesn't do that. He actually draws their attention to the places of suffering. It is easy in our world to both minimize and hide our own wounds and to ignore the wounds of others in the world. I know what it's like to feel compassion fatigue, to want to look away and flip the channel, to not pay attention to all the suffering in the world around. I do this with my own suffering, right? I tend to ignore it and stuff it down and put it away and not recall all of those memories. But gosh, do I do this today when it comes to things going on in the world. I can't even keep track right now of how many mass shootings there have been, how much suffering there has been of innocent people being killed. There's a lot of pain in our world. There's a lot of suffering. And our temptation is to want to look away, to just find something happy to watch on TV, to get lost in just silly videos on YouTube or something else. But in the resurrection, Jesus is not only inviting the disciples to experience the wonders of new life, he's also calling them to recall human suffering. See the marks? That's why this resurrection season, we are once again supporting Chemin La Vie Mio, a pathway to a better life. I remember my first trip to Haiti as we made our way out to the Central Plateau to visit women in a cohort being sponsored by the Haitian Timoun Foundation. And I remember being just shocked at the suffering that was all around. As children were running around with hair reddened from malnutrition, as women who could barely make eye contact with us as we approached their village. I remember wanting to look away, to just get through the day. I don't want to have to entertain these thoughts and these images of human suffering. And yet we were there for a purpose. We were there to meet these women, to learn about the program, and to give witness to the reality that there is suffering in the world. It was as if Jesus was saying to us there, look at the hands and look at the feet. Look at the marks of how these beautiful human lives have been marginalized and manipulated at the hands of systemic injustice, colonization, a history of slavery, greed. Look at it. Don't look away. When you're riding on the bus through Port-au-Prince or out on your way out to the Central Plateau, there's a temptation to just look at the seat back in front of you, because if you look out the window, you're going to see human suffering. You're going to see trash flowing down the river. You're going to see people scraping by with very skinny stomachs from hunger. You're going to see the reality of the world. I think it's important that we look at it. And that we not only look at it, but that we would be compelled as people of faith to participate in the power of resurrection, in the power of God's work of transforming suffering, woundedness, death into new life. So this Easter season, join me, join us in supporting the Resurrection Project. We have a goal of raising $18,000 to help fund 10 people through the CLM program. We're looking intentionally at a place of suffering in the world. But as we look there, we're not just looking at the wound, we're looking at how God can transform a wound into radiant new life. This is exactly what CLM does. They pair women up with other women and they send them through cohorts where they learn skilled trades. They learn to grow in confidence and hope. They learn that through hard work, faith, love, and tremendous support, that their lives can be different. And the marks that once defined them wholly, well, they're still evident. There's still marks in their lives of the suffering they've known, but it no longer defines them. They're defined now by a tenacious hope and spirit that they can provide for their children, that they don't have to fight to struggle every day just to eat. This is the hope of the resurrection, that God would transform wounds all around the world, that God would take those things that hurt people, and that through faith and prayer and hard work, God could transform that pain into joy. This is what we're called to be a witness to: death and resurrection, pain and new life. God alone can transform these wounds. We get to participate in God's work in the world. Amen.